Here we go.
Welcome everyone to another part of episode 3 of NapChats. NapChats are conversations between me, I'm Pastor Caleb Schultz, and this is my wife Johanna, about parenting in a biblical worldview. We take them while our girls are sleeping, and they last as long as our girls sleep. So let's hope they last longer than they did last time. Last time we were talking about contentment and money, and we had kind of just started feeling out the ideas of prosperity and where that can rub up against, what our culture is telling our kids and how our kids react to that. So I guess maybe I'll kick it over to you to let us know kind of where you want to move the conversation next.
Yeah, we are fighting against the idolatry of money. And I think now the culture is realizing that a little bit and swinging in the opposite direction towards things like minimalism, which we watched a documentary on, which is fascinating, really is interesting. But that can also be a form of idolatry as well, or a form of worship, correct?
Yeah, certainly. So natural human inclination is to try to find something to worship, right? And so when one God makes itself unavailable to our worship, we try to find another God to worship. And it's usually the equal and opposite thing of whatever we were worshiping previously, right? So you can see this in a lot of the things that our culture is doing now. Like, for example, like it used to be worshipped to be skinny. I think it is still kind of worshipped to be skinny. But as a reaction to that, you have a lot of this like fat is beautiful culture, which I'm not debating the merits of that, but it's an obvious like, okay, well, if I can't be skinny, then I'm going to worship being fat, right? Or, things like that. So you have the opposite reaction. And so that certainly happens with minimalism, or even just like sort of saying like, oh, I don't need all that stuff. Like there's a false humility that can be in that also, which is probably where I struggle the most. Because I don't think I am particularly tempted by materialism. Like I'm happy to live in a small house, drive an old car, wear old clothes. But I think my temptation is on the opposite side, where I feel like there's some sort of credit that's due to me for my lack of materialism. Like, look how righteous I am that I'm not materialistic. So I think, for kids, as you raise them, regardless of what your means are, your attitude about your means is going to rub off on your children. So if you're going to come from a comparative to other people sort of attitude, which is to say either we are more wealthy than most people, therefore we have more things, therefore we can afford more things, and that's what you should do, kids, because being wealthy is good. Or on the opposite side, we're not as wealthy as other people, but that means that we are, better people because we're not as materialistic. Like, and any variation of that in between, your kids are going to pick up on that. They are going to essentially see money the same way you see money, for good or for bad, and whether you have a lot of it or a little of it. So I think the necessary attitude shift for parents is then to say, okay, I have to actually think about money in terms of how God speaks about money, which none of it is mine, right? That's what the Bible would say. None of it is yours. God gives you some of it because he wants to provide for you. He gives some of it to you because he wants you to give it away, but none of it is yours. And if you have that as your understanding, you can just say, God has trusted us with this much money. And here are the things we're trying to do with that much money. And other people have more money, other people have less money, but we're just trying to do the best things that we can do with this money. And that also is going to inform how you make decisions about the things you spend your money on and how you sort of tout those things to your children. So we're buying a 72-inch TV. Yeah. Why? Right? And I think if you don't teach your children why, they're going to learn from the rest of the world why people have TVs, which is to be entertained. Or why are we going on a vacation? Well, are we going on a vacation because we have a lot of money and we do this stuff all the time, or because we want to spend more time together as a family, or because, we're trying to prove something to somebody. I don't know, whatever the reasons would be. But the way you talk about it is what kids learn. And so your attitude has to be sanctified, I think, if you're gonna get that same sanctified attitude in your kids.
That definitely reminds me of something I was just thinking of today. And just the wisdom behind every time you buy something or do something with your money, like think about it and don't just autopilot it. I was realizing I was autopiloting something with my brain, like, oh, I just need to do it and I need to do it this way. Where our oldest daughter, she needs new shoes. And so I was looking online, trying to find the best shoes for the cheapest money, looking secondhand and everything. And I was spending a lot of time doing this and just thinking, that's what I do, that's what I do, that's what I do. And then pausing and realizing I'm spending a lot of time looking for these shoes when I could be spending time with my daughter, reading something valuable, doing something valuable for my family. Is it worth saving that much money to get those best shoes? And if I do this with every single purchase we make, that's going to be a lot of time. And maybe that was necessary, but maybe not. And I didn't think about that. I didn't put that wisdom in and thinking, like, God, you gave me these resources. How should I go forward in this aspect? Which it's one little tiny thing. And there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to it, but just assessing myself every time I make these purchases or anything, is this how I should be spending my life? And there's nothing wrong with it, but there could be if I'm examining my heart.
Yeah. So there's a subtle idolatry that comes in to like getting the best deal, right? So this is again the opposite of the prosperity or the materialistic idol, which is the, again, sort of minimalist, try to get, cheap, try to go small, kind of thing that, like, again, I'm good because I do that. I save money. That also can be an idol. And I think, we have the saying, time is money, or time equals money, or whatever. And that is, I think that's a truism. The issue, though, is to evaluate which is more valuable to you, right? Because in every situation, you're making a trade. You're either trading your money for time or your time for money. And as Christians, what we can say is we only have so much. We know we have a limited amount of time on this earth. What we also can say is we know that God has an unlimited access to money. And so in general, if you have the ability to use your money to buy time, you should. I think that's a pretty good principle. I don't know that I can necessarily back that up with a biblical reference point or anything like that. But in a case like that, where you have the money to buy nicer shoes, probably, rather than, spend 2 hours on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah. Well, I think, is it worth the 2 hours for an extra $5? Definitely not. Is it worth an extra 10 minutes for an extra $20?
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of, it's all gray area, but it is good to think about it and to use wisdom with it. So. Yeah,
and your investments in your children are invaluable. Like, there's no parent who gets to the end of, their kids being in their house and says, I wish we'd spent less money on our kids, or less money. Less and more time with our kids.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, good thoughts. And I've been reading the Psalms more, and they bring up money a lot in the Psalms, actually, which was surprising because I don't think of the Psalms as talking about money, but they just talk about how essentially it's not a big deal. Like, your money isn't a big deal. Stop thinking about it, focusing on buying things a lot. Like, just like, it comes to nothing in the end. So I think the more I think about money less or buying things less or my material goods less, and more on my children, more on gaining wisdom, which they do talk about, gain that, spending more time in that area, that would be a wiser thing to do.
So I think our culture is wrestling with this because of kind of the breakdown of money as an idea, right? So very basically, it's hard to define money exactly, but the best definition I've heard of it is money is an agreed upon value of share of work, of stored work. So, I work for, a month doing my pastoral job, and I get my monthly salary. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking that work and I'm storing it in the concept of those numbers that go into my bank account, which there's nothing real there. They're just numbers, right? Because Canada and the United States are off the gold standard. So money is it's an idea, right? And because money is an idea, things like cryptocurrency, so Bitcoin and these sorts of things are coming out, which is eroding the stability of the dollar in every culture, which, regardless of whether you think it is going to ultimately crash and burn and we're going to use cryptocurrency all the time or whatever, what you have to say is it is not a permanent system. And therefore, if you have value in Canadian or American dollars, that is only as good as the regime that says that it has value.
Yeah.
And as soon as Canada ceases to be a nation in the same way that it is right now, like, those dollars don't have value. Yeah. People will fight for it, but if the world goes crazy, like, you have no value in those things. And so that's why I would say value your experiences with your children and teaching your children practical skills, because if the zombie apocalypse comes, which it's, I say that tongue in cheek, but if the zombie apocalypse comes, no one's going to care how much money you have in your hypothetical bank account, right? People are going to care whether you can build a house. People are going to care whether you can cook. People are going to care whether you can fight off the invaders into the town, right? And that means that having practical skills for your children is immensely more valuable than having more money, because money will only be able to buy them things as long as a system which you cannot keep alive by your own effort continues to live.
Sure. For some reason, the commercial popped into my head. There's no better time to buy gold because there's no better time to buy gold because gold lasts, but gold doesn't last. That's what the Bible talks about.
Yeah. I mean, of the ways of conveying value, is probably the most permanent in our world. Like, I just listened to an interesting thing that said that millennials particularly don't buy gold because we've lived in a relatively stable society our entire life. But if you go back to particularly the boomers, the greatest generation, those who had lived through wars and had seen like what happens when a society completely collapses, they were the ones who were buying gold particularly because they thought exactly what I just explained, that if their society goes down and the American dollar or the Canadian dollar goes away, then they have at least this thing of value, right? So this is not investment advice on this podcast or video cast.
Yeah, I wasn't saying you need to go buy gold. I was just thinking about how.
But it is a thing to say, okay, do I value and therefore do my children value things that last beyond just my cultural moment? Because my cultural moment, we've seen, can change overnight because of one event.
Yeah. So then I wanted to also talk about how, a lot of times your kid's going to look at their friend who has more money or more experiences or more, just things that they don't get to have. And how do you help them wrestle with that? Because it's very real. Like, oh, how come my friend gets to go to Disney World every year and we don't? Whatever the thing may be. How do you help them deal with that, especially at a young age?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a typical way of going about that is to help your kids focus on the good things that they do have that maybe that other child doesn't have. And there's probably some like practical wisdom in that for younger kids who just their ability to comprehend is a little bit weak. Yeah. But I think that actually in the long term will build more of this sense of superiority again to the kids. Like, oh, well, we don't do that because, my dad, well, for example, like in my household growing up, my dad is a pastor. My dad makes a pastor's salary, which is not bad money by any means, but it's not, it's not six figures, right? So, because we live on a pastor's salary and my mom doesn't work because she's a stay-at-home mom, we don't go on those trips. And like sort of the subtle messaging, I don't think my parents intended this at all, or maybe I just even thought it of myself. It might not be my parents' fault, but it was like, well, we're extra righteous though, right? Because we don't do that because my mom's a stay-at-home mom and that means she's a better mom, which you can debate that. And as a concept, not because my mom is not a great mom. My mom is a great mom. She probably watches this. But that's the idea, right? That you can have this subtle idolatry again of not having things. So, or
having other things. That was my family. I remember there was a family who did actually go to Disney World every year and they didn't have very much money, but they had a really small house and very not nice stuff. Like it was kind of a hole, and that sounds rude, but
they probably don't watch the show.
And I was like, oh, we've got a nice house though, so maybe we don't go to Disney World every year.
Yeah. So what do you do to fix that? I think again, you talk about all of your possessions as gifts from God. You say, well, we are so thankful we have this. Because like obsessive comparison disorder, which is a Mike Novotny term that I like, but that is just terrible for your psychology and it's terrible for your spirituality. And so if you can just always root everything that you are doing or saying or buying or possessing or whatever in what God is and what God says about those things, you're going to have a far easier time avoiding the sin of obsessive comparison disorder. Okay. So if I say, to my kids, isn't it amazing that you have a bed? God made sure you had a bed. Right? And they might be jealous of their friends' bunk beds, but I'm not talking about that. They'll say like, what about them? They have bunk beds. I say, you have a bed. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. And as a parent, you kind of can force that conversation when they're younger. Obviously, when they're a little bit older, they have to wrestle with those ideas themselves, but we're not at that stage yet. So we're not ready to comment on teenagers.
Right. Well, I think you got on the issue of just like being grateful for anything you have. And like, if we're going to talk comparing, why are we comparing to the people right next to us? I mean, there are people on the other side of the world who are far less than us. And we just don't see that right away, so we don't compare. But I think if your child compares to one thing, it's not harmful then to compare on that other direction and say, but look at all these people who don't have so many of the good things you have, and helping them see the blessings that they have there too. Is there anything wrong with, if they see, I'm going to keep using the friend who goes to Disney World every year, if they see that, just say like, yeah, that's great for them. I'm glad they get that good time. Is that helpful?
Yeah, you always want to, the Bible says to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. Like you want to be somebody who is empathetic both in a positive and in a negative sense to other people. So certainly there's value in saying like, yeah, that's really cool. Again, I think this is about your attitude as a parent though. Like I think most of the things we're going to say are going to come back to this. Like if you are a jealous person by nature, your kids are going to see that. And so if you are commenting about how, you know, they got to go to Disney World and we didn't, or even like your tone of voice communicates that.
Yeah.
Like your kids are going to pick that up, right? Sure. Unfortunately, we would love to say, do as I say and not as I do, but almost certainly our kids do what we do.
Yeah, yeah. Good. We also had some questions come in.
Yeah, so one of you wrote in and just asked kind of about expanding on the point that we just talked about with kind of the photo negative of prosperity being also idolatrous. So this idea of like, if you don't have things, you can sort of feel righteous about that. And question specifically about like older young adults, so young adults, and which is not really parenting, but there is some application here as we like train our kids to be young adults that, you know, they can feel like I'm doing the right thing because I'm saving up to be, you know, so that I can get out of the house. And I don't think we can make a distinction or a judgment based on just that idea of like, oh, should I stay in my house or should I move out and get into the world? We have to ask ourselves like, what do I value? And then how am I working to you know, keep that thing that I find valuable? So if your idea of a prosper or a good life is I need to have a lot of money, I need to have a lot of security, then you need to be preached to and be told your money is as good as a bad day. Yeah. You know, it can be gone in a moment. So don't put your hope in money. On the other hand, if your idea of life is like, well, I just want to go and get as much value out of everything that I can get my hands on, you know, essentially live, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die kind of lifestyle, well, you need to be told like, yeah, there's probably a certain level of planning and prudence that you need to have with your resources. And so it's for every person to examine their own heart and say, you know, do I see my life going a certain way because I idolize that, or because I hope by God's grace that that's the way that my life would kind of turn out, and I'm doing necessary steps to go down that path, but I'm okay if it wouldn't go that way. And so it is really a pastoral concern, right? It's just, as with all of these things, there's a ditch you can fall into on either side. So yeah, thanks for that. And we appreciate the comments and any questions. And I know there are a couple of topics suggested, which we'll hopefully get to in coming episodes as well. Is that all we got?
That's all I have for today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Money and contentment. If you have more thoughts on that, leave a comment below. If you want other topics for us to take on, we'd be glad to do those as well. We like engaging in the conversation with you. So those comments, we'll try as best as we can to include them in our episodes so that we can maybe help you, or you can help us. We always appreciate being corrected too. We don't really know what we're doing for the most part, but we know that God does. And so we pray for his grace in our parenting.
Yeah, and if you know of any parents who you think could benefit from this, maybe they don't have a spiritual partner, or maybe they do and they want to grow and have these conversations together, please share this video so that they can learn too. There's so many resources out there that aren't Christian. Let's get a few more out there that
aren't balanced. Oh, yeah. And not that we're perfect at being balanced, but it is kind of a core value of ours to try to be as balanced as possible. It's easy to kind of go one way or the other, and there's probably some places where we're not balanced, but you can call us out in the comments and say, you're not balanced on this. But that's what we're striving for, at least as much as we can.
That's it.
That's it.